Hey, everybody. Dave Schmittou here. Super excited to be able to work with you all on this seminar, this presentation titled Making Assessment Work for Educators Who Hate Data but Love Kids. When Chuck reached out to me and asked me to be a part of the Teacher Success School, I was over the moon. And I just hope that this course brings you some value, that it starts some conversations and allows you to do the work that's necessary to help kids. So let's jump on in. This is not going to be a big presentation about grading, although I spend a lot of time during the year talking about standards-based grading and how important it is to make sure that the feedback that we give to kids and to parents and to all stakeholders matches and aligns with mastery and our expectations. That's not going to be the conversation, but it does play a little part in what we're going to be talking about today. I write on here that what you grade is what you teach, and what you teach is what you value. I want you to think about this through the larger picture of assessment, whether or not you use traditional, I am using that in air quotes, grading of 0 to 100%, or whether or not you use rubrics or mastery-based, or whether or not you give final exams and have weighted grades, whatever the case may be. I want you to think about this statement. What you grade is what you teach. In other words, the assignments that you submit to kids or that you ask students to submit to you, the questions you put on various assignments, the tasks and the projects that you have students complete are things that you value or things that you see as important. And typically, those things that we say we're going to assess or that we're going to collect are those things that we put value in, the things that we think are important. I want you to think about this as we go forward, because it is the foundational principle of all that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking today about how we make those value judgments, how we make sure that those values and our values match with the values of the assessments we're providing, and that the students are able to give us evidence of their learning that match with those values. So let's jump in. Start with this picture. This is a picture of a painting that a lot of us are familiar with. But I'm going to be honest with you. When I see this painting, the painting of the Mona Lisa, I don't get it. I look at this painting and I say, all right, kind of looks like an ugly woman to me. But I know there are a lot of other people out there that look at this and say, wow, no, this is amazing. This is the most famous piece of artwork in the world for a reason. This is a masterpiece. And they see things in this painting that I don't necessarily see. And this is a great representation of how a lot of us view the assessments in our class. Assessment, in its truest sense, is truly just collecting evidence of quality, okay? Collecting evidence of mastery. And in some of our classrooms, what some of us see as great, what some of us see as quality, is different than what the person right next door, across the hall, or on the other side of the school or district sees as quality or masterful. What we're going to be talking about today is creating valid assessments. Valid assessments are those that are objective, those that take subjective interpretations out of the equation. We're going to be looking at things that methodologies that will help us in our classrooms, in our schools, in our districts, make objective opinions, make objective interpretations of mastery and quality. So let's jump in and learn how we can make our assessments unlike the Mona Lisa. But before we do that, let me talk about why this is important. Right now, in states everywhere, all across the country, really all across the world, we're being bombarded with assessments that we'll call big data. Big assessments. States are coming in, people in fancy suits are coming in and saying, every spring, I need you to give this assessment to your students. And if you're a person like me, in my day job, I'm a curriculum director. I give those assessments, I collect the results in the summertime, and then honestly, we don't really do a whole lot with them. We'll look at the results, we'll say, yay, we feel great, or boo, we didn't do all that great. And then at the micro level and the classroom level, not a lot happens. And in part, it's because we don't necessarily understand what those results are even telling us. For example, I have some things that we might see in some of those score reports from the big data. You might see a student listed as partially proficient or another one listed as proficient. Let me ask you, if you're a classroom teacher, what is the difference? What is the difference between a partially proficient reader and a proficient reader? What about an advanced reader versus a proficient reader? What can they do differently? And an even bigger question, what will you do differently for those two different readers, other than put them in a different group, other than have them work with other kids? Maybe you'll have them read a harder book, but what makes a book harder? Does that just mean it's longer? Does that mean because somebody went out there and gave it a certain level of AR points, it's now harder? What does that even mean? What about an advanced fifth grade reader versus a proficient seventh grade reader? What's the difference? Or maybe you give the SAT or the ACT, or maybe you have a standardized test that gives a scale score. Tell me, what's the difference between a 650 and a 710? What will you as an educator do differently for your kids? Now, these are assessments that a lot of people would look at and say these are valid assessments no matter what state or province you're in. But I'm going to ask you, do those results do anything for you? Do they allow you to do anything differently for your kids other than possibly put a label on them? Do you do anything different in your instruction? And if not, what's the point? So let's take it down to the classroom level. I want you to assume that you are a math teacher. And for this scenario, I have a hypothetical, fictional standard. It's a standard that we can kind of see some similarities to other standards that might exist, but this is a created standard. The standard is students will be able to solve multiplication problems from 1 to 100 without prompting. I want you to imagine that you have 3 different students in your class, Johnny, Susie, and Hector. And if you just look at the descriptions of these 3, I'm going to ask you, which of these students gets the better grade in your class? Johnny, on a test or a quiz, gets 75 out of 100, looking at solving multiplication problems from 1 to 100. But in your class, over the last couple weeks, he hasn't done any homework, but he does participate in class. Or what about Susie? She takes twice as long to complete that test. She gets an 85 out of 100. She also did no homework, but she also never participates in class. Now there's Hector. Hector, oh, God bless Hector, gets a 62 out of 100. Hector completes every single homework assignment, so diligent, and he tries so hard in class. As a matter of fact, he probably comes into your classroom at lunchtime to get some support and some help. My question to you is, which of these students gets a better grade? Which of these students knows more? And then what do you do differently for each of these 3 kids? Do we have enough information from this to make those decisions? Now, when we look at this, there are some underlying things that hopefully you'll start to ask yourself. You'll ask yourself, does homework even matter? Does participation matter? Because those are values. Again, the things that we value are the things that we grade, and the things that we grade are the things that we teach, and vice versa. We'll look at the percentages on this test. Are we to assume that every single problem, every single point on this test is of equal weight, value, and importance? Do we know that Johnny got the easy ones right or the hard ones right? What about Hector? Did Hector struggle with the simple problems, or did he struggle with the more complex problems? Do we know what these assessments really look like? And again, do we have enough information to make any informed decisions going forward? What about this? Again, I live here in the state of Michigan. It's an amazing state 3 months out of the year. The rest of the year, though, I get to sit down and just create stuff like this because there's not a whole lot else to do. I'm not a winter guy. But let's assume that I'm teaching a class of 5th graders. We'll just throw this out to 5th grade. And I give an assessment question that looks like this. The question is, what is the capital of Michigan? One student writes down a capital letter M. The other student writes down Detroit. My question to you is, which of these students knows more? I'll take a dramatic pause here because it's going to be difficult to say. Now, back when I was in the classroom, I'll be honest with you, I probably would have marked both of these questions wrong. I would have said neither one of these students knows what I'm asking. But what if it's a language arts class and we're talking about capitalization? Could we argue that the first student actually knows more? Or what if this is a Michigan history class and this student at the bottom understands that Detroit was the original capital of Michigan? Capital of Michigan today is Lansing, but do we know which student knows more? I don't know. The question is, does your assessment tell you what students know? Not. Do they simply tell you what the student doesn't know? We need to make sure that our assessments are framed through that lens of strengths. What does the student know? What is their schema? What information are they coming to us with? What about this one? What if we had a question that said, define the word hypothesis? One student writes, it's when you're really cold. The other student says, it's a fat animal in Africa. I'm going to ask you, what do these students know? Well, the top student, one might argue, wow, this person understands Latin root words. They understand hypo, and maybe they're getting it confused with hypothermia. Possibly. Possibly the student at the bottom, maybe he's making a connection to something he just learned about in science class. Maybe he struggles with decoding or fluency. And because this is written out, he thinks that word hypothesis is the same thing as hippopotamus. Maybe if you would have asked this question out loud, he might have gotten it right, but he's obviously getting some things confused. Question is, what do these students know? What about this one? This one is one of my favorites because I'll be honest with you. When I presented this a couple of years ago at a conference, I did this just tongue in cheek, thinking it was funny, asking what does this student understand? When you look at it, it's interesting. You've got greater than, less than, and it says right or, and the student simply wrote or over and over and over again. I thought, this is a kid that's being literal. When I presented this a couple of years ago, I actually had a student who was in their undergrad, about to become a teacher. And this student said, actually, this student might actually be super smart. Maybe they're into coding, because when you're coding in HTML, and again, I took this person at their word, anything that's within those brackets means it's the literal translation. It's what the directions are. This student might have been into coding and they saw those brackets and said, I'm simply supposed to write the word or. That's a possibility. Who knows? The question is, do your assessments tell you what students know? Or are they simply filled with hoops for students to jump through? Or are they based off of your own subjective opinions of right or wrong? Now, I give this example to a lot of people. And if you follow me on social media, you know I run a lot. Now, I'm not fast, but I do run marathons and I train. I go for runs every single day. Now, I could argue in my job that being a runner helps me become a better educator. That I could say that as a runner, I spend a lot of time outside, and when I'm running, I'm reflecting and I'm thinking and coming up with some great ideas and de-stressing and decluttering my life and finding that balance. I could argue that running helps keep me physically fit so that I don't have to take sick days, which allows me to come in and provide a better education. I could argue that running makes me a better educator. But what if I took that a step further? And as a school administrator, I came to your school and said, guess what, teachers? This year, your evaluation is going to be based off of your ability to run as well as I do. That's right. This May, if you are able to run a marathon as quickly as I do, you are going to be an effective educator. You have to go out and run 26.2 miles in 3 hours and 53 minutes. If you can do that, you pass. If you can beat me, you're highly effective. If you can't do it, minimally effective. If you don't even show up, you're ineffective. Now, if I were to present that to you and I make the case that being a runner makes you a better educator, and then I put that out and said, this is how you're going to be graded, do you think your union would file a grievance on me? I guarantee it. There'd be people that say, that's not fair. That's a loose connection that you're making there. Or I've never run a day in my life. It's not fair to hold me to that same standard. Or I have a medical disability that doesn't allow me to run. Now, maybe we might have some PE teachers that say, whew, I finally have a rubric that works for me. The bottom line is we wouldn't be able to make that connection. I would not be justified in bringing that to you. I use this example, though, to say, oftentimes in our classrooms, we do things that are very similar. Sometimes in our classrooms, we have these expectations for kids, and we say, hey, this works for me. This is what helped me be who I am. And if it worked for me, I'm going to hold you to the same standard and hold you accountable and add this into a component of your grade. Not saying it's not valuable, not saying it doesn't work and it's not important. But my question is, does it fit in the grade? Things like it has to be written in blue or black ink. You have to turn things in on time. You have to rip off those hairy edges off of the paper before you rip it out of your notebook and hand it in to me. Your name needs to be up in the right-hand corner. You have to have your first and your last name. Whatever the case is, you have to write in cursive. You need to write in print. It needs to be typed. We put all these arbitrary what ifs, these arbitrary hoops for kids to jump through simply because it works best for us and it's convenient for us. What I'm going to challenge you to do is make sure that your assessments show you what a student knows about the content and the topic, and that it's not tainted and it's not polluted by what's best for you. So how do you do all this? Well, number one is you have to make sure that your assessments are rooted in the standards. And again, this isn't a talk on standards-based grading, but it does kind of fit in. I'm going to give you a statistic that is an actual statistic. It's an overwhelming statistic. It's a scary statistic, but it's a real statistic. This is based off of the Common Core standards. Now, every state in America has standards that are loosely connected to the Common Core. Whether they were built off the Common Core, they're fully adopted from the Common Core, they've been adjusted from the Common Core. I use sixth grade as my example here because it is smack dab in the middle of the learning continuum from kindergarten to 12th grade. In sixth grade, Do you realize there are 257 total standards for a student to master during the course of the year? And that's just the core subjects of math, language arts, social studies, and science. 257 total standards for a student to master. And I say master, not simply cover, because if we just simply had to cover the standards, teachers on your first day of school, you could just pull out those standards and read them to your kids and be done. That's not how it works. Our job is to teach them so that students actually learn them and can master them. Because again, ultimately, they're going to be assessed on these things at the end of the year. 257. Do you know that equates to a student mastering a new standard every 0.7 days? Every 0.7 days, they're going to master something new. That is ridiculous. That's not how learning works. But here in the States, we look at those well-rounded students and we say it's not just about those four core. If we included special areas of art, music, and PE, the big three, the number of standards jumps to 1,431. Overwhelming, impossible. So how are we supposed to make sure that our assessments match the standard when we're saying it's impossible to have students reach mastery of all these standards? Are we saying we're just supposed to pick and choose which standards we teach and cover? Kind of, sort of. But I'm also going to tell you there's a method to it. And here's what I'm going to challenge you to do. If you have a phone, take a screenshot of this picture, because this is the Da Vinci Code for your assessments. This is the Da Vinci Code for your course planning. I am a curriculum director, like I said. I am the guy that comes in and helps teachers align what they're teaching, when they're teaching it, where they're teaching it. But I'm also a guy that says, I hate pacing guides. I hate those frameworks, because oftentimes those force us to simply cover content as opposed to teach to mastery. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you as a teacher to look at the standards that are assigned to you for your grade level, for your subject area. And I want you to go through and I want you to give each standard a point if it's a standard that you believe has leverage, meaning it's a standard that transcends just your subject area. If you teach language arts, if it's a standard that will help a student gain better mastery, understanding in social studies or science, give it a point. I want you to give that standard a point if it's a standard that you believe comes with endurance, meaning it's a standard that will allow for future understandings in another year. Maybe you teach sixth grade, and this standard will help a student reach more mastery or have greater understanding in eighth grade or ninth grade. Give it a point. Then I want you to use Bloom's taxonomy. I know a lot of you are probably familiar with Webb's. It's great. Webb's has 4 levels. I'm going to ask you to use Bloom so we can differentiate just a little bit more. I want you to go through your standard, and I want you to give the standard 1 point if it's a standard based off of recall. In other words, students just have to memorize something. I want you to give it 2 points if it's a standard based off of understanding or putting things into their own words. 3 if it's an application standard. 4 if it's analysis. 5 if it's synthesis. Just keep on going. Then I want you to add up your totals for all of your standards, your top 10 to 15. Those are the standards you're teaching to mastery this year. And you will see a clear line of demarcation on this. I have done this now in states everywhere. And no matter what district I'm in, what teachers I'm working with, we see a clear line between these essential standards that we have to teach because they have leverage, endurance, and are deep, and those that we can simply cover. I'm going to challenge you to make your assessments match these standards. Again, what you assess, what you grade is what you teach, and what you teach is what you value. Make these your essentials. Then I'm going to challenge you, plug it into a rubric somehow. There are lots of places out there that teach you how to do rubrics. You can take a picture of this, and we can dive into this at another time. But for the sake of our conversation, build your standards, build your instruction off of rubrics focused on mastery. Just like your own teacher evaluation probably is. A lot of us have had conversations about how to create rubrics. Our rubrics, though, are not going to be based off of task completion. They're going to be based off of learning progression. Maybe I'll come back and I'll teach you about this at another time. Again, have it based off of depth of understanding. I've had people that have gone through and they've created their own rubrics and they've broken it down in a lot of different ways. The rubrics tend to follow the progression on Bloom's, with that level 3 being the guided or the level of complexity within the standard. Level 2 is 1 level below on Bloom's. Level 1 is 2 levels below on Bloom's. It's an awesome way to do it. I've had people come up with great ways to assess using this. I've had math teachers say that they're going to have assessments broken into the various levels. A student will start with the level 3 assessment because that's the guided, that's the standard. If they get that right, they then have the option to do a level 4 assessment. If they don't get the level 3, then they get the level 2. If they don't get the level 2, they get the level 1. It's not about making students climb and jump through hoops starting at a level 1 and moving their way up. Just like in the classroom, as an administrator, I would never come up and say, you need to prove to me you're an ineffective teacher. Show me that you can do the level 1 things on the rubric before we move on to you being a minimally effective teacher. Once you master being minimally effective, now let's work on effective. No, I go in and I say, let me see all the evidence of effective and highly effective teaching that I can find. Do the same thing for your kids. I've had language arts teachers break down rubrics. They have these big themes that pull in all the standards from literature or fictional text and informational text and writing, and have big units and rubrics that drive their instruction. Another foundational principle is formative and summative assessments. Oh, I hate those words. They should be the same thing. If in your classroom, in your school, you have a policy that says we have formative assessments that we don't grade or aren't worth as much, and we use those to inform our practice, and then we have summative assessments that do matter, I want you to think about this concept for a second. What we're saying is that there are formative assessments that don't count as much. In other words, they aren't as valid, they aren't quality evidence, and that's what we're basing our instructional decisions on to make changes. And yet we're going to have these big assessments, these summative assessments that we're going to say are high quality, they are valid, and then we're only going to assign those at the end when we can't really make instructional shifts. That makes no sense whatsoever. The best assessments are both formative and summative. We use them formatively and we use them summatively. Assessment is assessment. Evidence is evidence, whether it comes at the beginning of instruction or at the end of instruction. When a kid knows it, they know it, they get credit for knowing it. If they don't know it, we use that information to provide future instruction. We don't say we're going to teach a bunch of stuff, then just give a test. The question is, how do you know when to give a test or an assessment? If you know the kids already know it, do you need to give another assessment? If you're not sure if the kid knows it, why are they getting an assessment? You should be constantly assessing. You should be constantly trying to collect evidence to inform your craft. I've had lots of teachers say, okay, this is all great, but in my school, my district, we still use that traditional grading model. How does all this fit? Well, here's an example of something you can do. This is a baby step for you, but it's a huge baby step. Let's say that every Friday you are expected or required to give a 10-question quiz test assessment. I'm going to challenge you. The first 6 questions, have them based off of this week's learning, your standard, the thing that you're focusing on right now. Have the next 2 questions focus on past content and 2 more questions based off of future content. You can then assess what's going on now. You can assess what happened in the past and assess what's going on in the future. Check to see if students have prior knowledge. Check to see if the information you presented actually does have endurance. And you can check for mastery right now so you can make your adjustments for the following week. This also comes into play with a theory that I have and a practice and a procedure I'm going to introduce you to. I'm going to challenge you to play tic-tac-toe with your grading. I'm a firm believer in the power of 3. We talk about a three-braided cord being extremely strong. We talk about the triangulation of data, having 3 data points. Here in America, we even talk about the 3 branches of government. I'm a believer that students need to show mastery 3 times before we can firmly say, yep, they got it. I would also argue that those 3 times should also be consistent and 3 times in a row. If you give an assessment and students can show you that they got it now, they got it in the past, and they got it in the future, you're good. Maybe you give an assessment and they have to answer 3 questions correctly in a row based off of a single standard. Awesome. That's quality evidence. I argue that 3 in a row or tic-tac-toe is the way to demonstrate mastery. And again, that consistency matters. If a student is getting something right now, then they get it right 6 months from now, and they get it right 12 months from now, but there's all these gaps and holes in between, that lack of consistency is a concern for me. And I wouldn't have full confidence that a student has got it. I would argue that it needs to be 3 in a row. So going back to that initial starting point, if a student can answer 3 questions correctly in a row on the first out of the first 6, awesome, they got it. If they can answer, if they can show you that they got it now, they got it in the future, and they got it in the past, boom, again, that's 3 in a row. You've broken your own assessment down into 3 in a row. If you're a math teacher, have students just work on any 3 problems they think they can answer correctly in a row. Forget the answer all the evens, answer all the odds. Can they answer 3 in a row? Maybe it's 3 distinct projects. Maybe you're in a place where you are doing rubric-based grading and you say 3 and a 4 as a got it. Cool. 3 in a row of 3s or 4s, and they've got it. Maybe you are in a pass-fail environment. 3 times in a row of passing or credit, they got it. Maybe you are still required to do percentages and traditional grading. You and your team figure out what the percentage equals got it, whether it's a A or B, or maybe it's a C or better, whatever. 3 in a row represents they got it. When they got it, they got it, no matter when it is that they got it, whether it's before you started teaching or after you did your teaching or in the middle of all your teaching. 3 in a row to prove they got it. I'm going to challenge you, keep growing, keep learning. If you want to reach out to me at any time, that's my actual cell number. There's a website down there. You can reach out to me on social media as well. I am happy to help. Have an amazing day and keep growing.